instructor, Caitlin Doyle, and what we're going to work on today in this tutorial is focusing on a poetic form known as the villanelle. The villanelle is a form with French roots, and we're going to talk about its lineage, its history a little bit. We're going to look at the specifics of its structural properties. We're going to look at examples together. We're going to listen to recordings so that you really have a sense of what the villanelle is like visually and sonically. And then we're going to work toward getting you to a place where you feel like you can attempt to write your own villanelle. I'm particularly excited to be talking about the villanelle with you today because it's one of the first poetic forms that I fell in love with when I was a kid. And I think it's one that you're really going to enjoy. So let's go ahead and get started. We can begin by asking, where did the villanelle come from? And a great way to find information about that is to visit poets.org. So I've culled some information from poets.org, which is a terrific resource for all things poetry related, so that we can have an overview of the lineage of the villanelle here. Strange as it may seem for a poem with such a rigid rhyme scheme, the villanelle did not start off as a fixed form. During the Renaissance, the villanella and villancio, from the Italian villano, or peasant, were Italian and Spanish dance songs. French poets who called their poems villanelle did not follow any specific themes, rhymes, or refrains. Rather, the title villanelle implied that, like the Italian and Spanish dance songs, their poems spoke of simple, often pastoral or rustic themes. Regardless of its provenance, the form did not catch fire in France, but it has become increasingly popular among poets writing in English. Contemporary poets have not limited themselves to the pastoral themes originally expressed by the free-form villanelles of the Renaissance, and they have loosened the fixed form to allow variations on the refrains. Examples of poets who have penned memorable villanelles include W.H. Auden, Oscar Wilde, Seamus Heaney, Hayden Carruth, Elizabeth Bishop, and Theodore Retke. Let's look together at a villanelle now. I want you to have the experience of looking at one and listening to one in the voice of the poet himself before we dive into the technical elements, just so you can get a sense of the form's effects.
The waking. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. We think by feeling. What is there to know? I hear my being dance from ear to ear. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Of those so close beside me, which are you? God bless the ground. I shall walk softly there and learn by going where I have to go. Light takes the tree, but who can tell us how? The lowly worm climbs up a winding stair. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. Great nature has another thing to do to you and me. So take the lively air and, lovely, learn by going where to go. This shaking keeps me steady. I should know what falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go.
Now that you have a sense of the form's sonic, imagistic, and thematic effects, let's look at some of the specifics of the structure. It's a 19-line poem with 2 repeating rhyme words and 2 refrains. In this case, by refrains, we mean 2 fully repeating lines. The form is made up of 5 3-line stanzas, also known as tercets, followed by 1 4-line stanza, also known as a quatrain. The first and third lines of the opening tercet are repeated alternately in the last lines of the succeeding stanzas. In the final stanza, the refrain serves as the poem's 2 concluding lines, which you observed in the waking. So, what we're going to do now is look at a way that you can use a template to establish the pattern of the villanelle, which can help you when you are getting ready to write one of your own, and also help you in understanding how the villanelles of other poets are put together. Using capital letters to represent the refrains and lowercase letters to represent the rhymes, the form could be expressed in the following pattern. Each letter or letter number combination represents a line in a stanza. So you can see that they're clustered in 3-line stanzas and that they repeat in a certain pattern. So keep that in mind as we take this idea and transfer it to the actual text of the poem that we just looked at. So here you can see that the uppercase letter number combinations A1 and A2 correspond to the repeating refrains in the poem, the 2 lines that repeat, which I've also underlined and placed in bold. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow, and I learn by going where I have to go. And you can see that the lowercase letters, the A's and B's, correspond with the other repeating rhymes in the poems. The B rhymes, you can see, he uses some slant rhymes: fear, ear, there, stare, air, and near. And the lowercase A rhymes are also slant rhymes: know, you, how, do, and know again. It can be really useful when you're first sitting down to attempt a villanelle to work with a template like this next to you, with all of these distinctions in the rhyme scheme and the refrains marked out, and with the letter number combinations on the left side. And then also on your own paper, you might find it useful to, on the far left side, write out, uppercase A1, then lowercase b, then uppercase A2, and then new stanza, lowercase a, lowercase b, uppercase A1, etc., going down all the way to the end, so that you can keep referring back on the left to where you need to be arriving in terms of your refrain and rhyme scheme. Eventually, working like that enough can help you get the pattern ingrained so that you can work without the template right there. So though the goal is to eventually be able to internalize the form to the point where you're working with it on a much more instinctual level, starting out with a template like this can really be of great assistance. Another thing you'll notice as you look at the text here and remember what it sounded like when it was read aloud is that the lines possess a rhythmic regularity. And that's because the poem is in a metrical pattern known as iambic pentameter, which essentially means that there are 5 beats per line. There are a lot more elements to it than that, but that's a basic understanding we can work with for our purposes in this lesson. And the thing that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of villanelles in the English language either adhere fairly strictly to iambic pentameter or employ some variation on that basic theme. So that's something you're going to want to be thinking about when you write your own villanelle, the idea of how to rhythmically balance your lines in some way. Whether or not that's iambic pentameter is up to you, but you can use the idea of maintaining a similar number of stresses per line as a way of achieving rhythmic regularity that gestures toward the kind of effect Retke is achieving here. So let's move on to the bigger question beyond technical elements of why would somebody write a villanelle in the first place? Why would somebody sit down and choose this particular form for their given subject matter? When it comes to the question of why somebody would write a villanelle, it's useful to think about the speaker in Retke's The Waking And consider how he continually returns to the following statements: I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go. So it's a speaker who is caught in a certain cycle of repetition and an obsessive return to psychic and emotional spaces that he uses in some way to both mark where he's been and continually propel him forward. So, considering the form's emphasis on cyclical repetition, the villanelle makes a powerful vehicle for exploring obsession, longing, and the human inability to fully let go of the past. The villanelle can capture the motion of a mind that finds itself, like the mind of the speaker in the waking, returning again and again to a pivotal experience, event, or emotion. The villanelle moves forward and backward simultaneously, and it turns time itself into a kind of incantation. And you can think of this musical quality as being related to the form's roots in a song and dance tradition, which we talked about earlier. When you think about finding subject matter suited to a villanelle, you want to think about questions like what obsesses you, what haunts you, what calls you back over and over. I want to finish this tutorial with another example of a villanelle. This one is called The House on the Hill by Edwin Arlington Robinson. You'll remember that at the start of the tutorial I mentioned that I was particularly eager to introduce you to the villanelle form because I have a strong connection to the form going all the way back to my childhood, and that's largely because of this poem. I first encountered The House on the Hill in a book of illustrated verse for children, and I had no idea that it was following a prescribed pattern known as a villanelle, but I was captivated by the repetitions, by the haunting, incantatory power of it, and it remains one of my absolute favorite poems of all time. So I'll read it to you now, and you can read along as you hear it. The House on the Hill. They are all gone away. The house is shut and still. There is nothing more to say. Through broken walls and gray, the winds blow bleak and shrill. They are all gone away. Nor is there one today to speak them good or ill. There is nothing more to say. Why is it then we stray around the sunken sill? They are all gone away. And our poor fancy play for them is wasted skill. There is nothing more to say. There is ruin and decay in the house on the hill. They are all gone away. There is nothing more to say. What can the house on the hill teach us about the villanelle form? Because I didn't just include it due to the fact that I love it so much, I also wanted to use it as a way to illustrate what I think are some of the most compelling features of the villanelle. One of the ways I think this poem embodies some of the best that the villanelle form can achieve is through the way that it captures the tension between a desire to move forward and a continual sense of being called back to something that hasn't been resolved, which we've touched on a little bit already in the tutorial, but here you see it in the narrative situation of the we, which we can imagine as a group of children. They are continually drawn to play around this abandoned house on a hill, and even though the people in the house are gone and there's no one there to speak good or ill of the people, still the children stray around the sunken sill. They're after some sense of the life that used to be there. And they are the ghosts that haunt the house, rather than what one might assume would be the expected ghost, that of the spirits of the people who once occupied the house. So the poem enacts different kinds of haunting and mirrors that in the sound of the language. We've come to the end of the tutorial, and I want to do a quick review of what we've covered in this introduction to the villanelle form. We talked about the form's origins briefly and also about its main technical components. We also looked at two examples, Theodore Recky's The Waking and The House on the Hill by Edwin Arlington Robinson. We use them as models not only for the formal elements of the villanelle tradition, but also as examples of how to examine the larger question of the impetus behind the villanelle form, to ask why would one be driven to write a villanelle. And I hope that this unit has helped you derive some answers to those questions so that you have a sense of what subject matter might be burning in you when you sit down to write your own villanelle. I'll close with a few stanzas from one of the most famous villanelles of all time, read by the poet himself.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night.